Well, hello, fellow woodworkers. My name's Dave Ardito, and in today's session, I'm going to be guiding you on the important topic of safety in your wood shop. Now, I've partnered with Woodworking for Beginners. It is a very supportive and very vibrant group that you can find on Facebook. It's an absolutely phenomenal community with lots of input and guidance, so be sure to check it out. If you haven't joined the group yet, you can find the group's link in the video description down below, so be sure to have a look at that. You can also, in that description, find a link to my personal YouTube channel in the event that you'd like to see what else that I've been working on. Now let's get talking about the importance of safety in the shop. So I learned this at a very young age, doing a lot of woodworking projects with my father, that safety is paramount. We have to look after ourselves, because if we don't, it's a good chance we might not be able to do this anymore, because we deal with a lot of very dangerous tools. And so what I've got here in front of me, these are some of the basic safety things that we need to take into consideration when we're going to be using the various types of tools. Okay, and so we're going to start with some of the basic ones. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out is that I'm wearing a set of glasses, okay, a pair of glasses. These glasses are not approved by any governing authority to be safety glasses. These are simply prescription glasses. And so in the event that I choose to wear these rather than wearing a pair of safety glasses when I do my woodworking, what I run the risk of happening is a piece flying into these lenses that can actually shatter the lens and then go through it and right into my eye. So as a result of that, the preferred option when it comes to protecting your eyes is to use a pair of safety glasses. So I'm based in Canada. These ones are CSA approved. Different countries have different approval authorities. These ones here work really well. The idea behind a safety glass is, in the event that something hits these, yes, there is a chance that it can potentially puncture it. However, it will not shatter, and more often than not, it will actually hold the piece in place in the lens. So that's a really, really important one. In addition to that, mine happen to have a coating of a rubber or whatnot on the inside, just to help seal the glasses to the face, to prevent particles from being able to get around the backside of my glasses. Okay, so that's number one, is the safety glasses. Prescriptions, remember, they're not safety glasses. The next one is the clothing that you're going to be wearing when you're building your project. So you'll notice that I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, and it is a little bit loose here in the arms. However, it is tight here around the end of the arm. And so if we're going to be wearing long sleeves, it needs to be tight fitting. The reason it needs to be tight fitting, especially if we're going to be dealing with power tools, is we want to make sure that we're not going to get our clothing caught in anything and get our arms, our extremities pulled into it. Okay, so tight fitting clothing is going to be very important as well. Now, a lot of the tools that we might deal with also come with an excessive amount of noise. And in order to protect ourselves from that excessive amount of noise, another essential that you should have in the shop is some hearing protection. So these are just a standard pair of earmuffs. You can get all different kinds, all different brands, but they work really well simply by just pulling apart like this and going over your head and right over top of your ears like this. So it's very, very simple to use. And when you're using tools that you might have in your shop, such as a thickness planer, a jointer, a router, even a table saw, those produce a lot of loud noise. So these here are always going to be a good idea to have. In addition to that, you may use some tools for a longer duration that don't produce as much noise, such as something like a sander, a disc sander. When it comes to those types of tools, you don't necessarily need this. But it's not a bad idea if you're going to be doing it for a long period of time, because you're really exposing your ears to a lot of excessive noise that you shouldn't be. So having a pair of earmuffs like this, incredibly important. Just the one thing with these to be aware of is that when you're wearing hearing protection, you can't hear what's going on around you in your environment as much. So as soon as you put these on, your eyes need to be opened even more to make sure that you're watching, such as, somebody walking into the shop when you're not expecting them, that sort of stuff. All right, so that's the basics on hearing protection. Now, let's look at a couple other elements of personal protective equipment. So one of them is respirators. Okay, now when it comes to working with woods can be carcinogenic, so they can have a significant negative effect on your lungs. So we don't want to be inhaling that dust. And so in order to prevent that, we can use different types of respirators that are going to cover over our face and loop around our ears, the back of our head, whatever the case may be, in order to prevent us from inhaling that. And there are some materials that you might decide to cut that are even more inherently dangerous than others, such as a material like this, which is known as an MDF, or a medium density fiberboard. This board here produces a dust that if you inhale it, or if you inhale enough of it, even small exposures, you can cause a lot of pain in your lungs, and you really don't want that. So I can't stress enough, when you're doing a lot of these wood activities such as sanding or cutting or using your planer, there's always lots of fine dust particles that get into the air. So you always want to consider using a respirator. Now, the one that I use the most is this one here that I just got off of Amazon, called an RZ mask. An RZ mask is very handy because it's got this neoprene outer liner, and then on the inside it has a paper filter. This paper filter is rated very similar to what we would call an N95. The N95 paper mask means that it is resistant to 95% of particles coming through it, which is really good. Okay, and wearing a mask like this is very simple. There's a nose piece here that we would pinch, and we just put it on like this and strap it around the back of our head. Just like that. Nice and easy. I like this one because it's more comfortable for shorter work, certainly. Now, that is not any type of an approved respirator. That is something that we would use for what we would call nuisance dust. Okay, so that's where we're not required to wear a respirator. Now, of course, by laws, when we're working at home, we're not typically required to wear a respirator anyways. But if we are going to wear an actual respirator at home, such as one like this, then it's something that we may want to make sure that we're doing correctly. Now, this respirator here, this is not one that I use very often. This respirator I primarily use when I'm dealing with chemicals or paints or things that have a lot of vapors or fumes associated with them, or if I'm dealing with heavy amounts of dust. So as an example, I recently had to do some drywall mudding and sanding in my basement, and so I put this respirator on. Now, a few things to note about this. This one is rubber on the inside. It is intended to seal directly to the face. So if you look at my face here, I've got a beard. What that means is that's going to somewhat break this seal, and as a result, you still run the chance of getting some particles coming in behind it. And so what I would actually do with this, whenever I had to wear this, one of the reasons why I don't do it too often, is I shaved my beard off in order to be able to do that, because that way I know I'm at least getting a really good seal. The other thing to know about this is the types of cartridges that you use. So there's very simple. They twist on, and then they go back on here, and they're sometimes a little bit stubborn, but they do go back on there. These filters, and these ones here I'll show you as an example. These are known as a P100. There's all kinds of different looks. This is a P100. If you look in the back here, you can see that it kind of looks like a HEPA filter. These P100s are designed to resist 99.98% of particles from passing through them, which is really good. The the P stands for oil proof. And so what that means, being oil proof, is that the moisture from your breath and other types of moisture in the air are not going to gum the filter up, and so it's still going to work really well. The other masks, such as an N95, the N stands for not resistant to oil. So when you use those types of disposable masks, they are exactly that, disposable. They are designed to be used once and then thrown out. just from the nature of you breathing in and out of them. You're filling the inside with moisture, and what you'll find over time is that you will start to lose the ability to inhale or exhale easily, and as a result of that, it causes the mask to actually balloon out from your face and allows the particles to enter. So if you're going to be using a respirator, I would suggest, my preference, if it's only for nuisance dust, is getting one of these RZ masks, and there's likely other brands of these as well. If you have to use it for other stuff, for heavier applications, use the actual respirator. Make sure that you're clean shaven. Make sure that you're using the right cartridges. Some cartridges that they have for these respirators, I haven't needed to get them, but they're known as organic vapor cartridges, which is essentially an active charcoal that becomes a chemical magnet for any of those chemicals that might be flowing through the air. So a really good idea if you're dealing with different types of paints or finishes that have vapors associated with them that you're not supposed to be inhaling. So the respirator is really, really good for that. Now, going beyond respiratory protection, the other thing to take into consideration is gloves. Okay, so these are gloves, nitrile gloves, that I use when I'm applying primarily oil-based finishes, such as it could be a linseed oil, it could be a Rubio monocoat, it could be any of those things. I use these more often than not just to keep that material off of my hands, which is a really good idea. What you have to be very careful with about gloves, whether it be this glove or it be any other type of gloves, is where you're going to be working around any rotating shafts or spindles or gears, so such as a saw blade, a drill press, a miter saw, a bandsaw, even any of those tools. You should never be wearing gloves or any sort of clothing, as I said about the shirt, that's going to come even close to a contact point with those, because it can actually pull you in. Right? So it can pull your hand in, it can pull your arm in. So we don't want to be doing that. So in certain applications, when we're dealing with spinning tools, we only ever do it with our bare hands. Now, doing it with your bare hands, that makes a lot of people really nervous. And one of the biggest ones for that is probably the table saw, because nobody wants to get their hand near the blade, which I completely understand. And so that's why we have other devices that we can use for that. So one example of that is this push stick here. This is one that's it's made by Microjig. It's called the Gripper. And it's actually really, really handy. What it does is it forces our hand to stay up at the top like this as we're pushing a piece through, while the blade may go underneath. Okay, and we can set this up to different widths. So this entire thing is adjustable. So you can move this to one side, you can move it all the way to the other side. It really depends on the thickness of the piece that you're going to be cutting. In addition to that, let's say your piece is thinner, and this part of the push stick may be able to make contact with the piece, but this part can't. Then what you can actually do with this is you can utilize this little drop down piece here, where you just loosen it up, drop it down, and then tighten those back up again. And there's a little rubber O-ring in there, so it holds it really solidly in place. And now, as you can see, I can cut a smaller piece while still having this part of my gripper riding on the actual table saw surface itself. So it keeps it nice and level, and I can apply nice even pressure. So this is a really good guide that you can use with your table saw. And it's not just limited to table saw applications. You can use this on a router table or any of those other areas, those other tools you're going to use where you have to push material through sharp blades. Now, the only other thing with this is not everybody is comfortable going like this and pushing this while running their hand directly over top of a table saw blade. So one of the things you have to be very, very careful with is when you're going to use this and you're going to be running the blade through this channel, you need to make sure that the blade is not going to contact the underneath part of this plastic at any time. So there is a little bit of setup involved with this, but once you've got it set up, once you've got used to it, it is really, really safe to use. In addition to that, because of its design, it also enables you to push your piece through the table saw while standing off to the side. That way, in the event that there is any sort of kickback, the piece is going to fly past you and not fly at you if you're standing right behind the blade. So you always want to try to stand to the side. Now, there are some other options for push sticks as well. These are a couple of pressure paddles that I have. These I use on my router table. to guide material past the blade in an effort to keep my hands away from that bit as much as possible. So this is just another style. It is intended for something like a router. You wouldn't use something like this on a table saw simply because of the angle here on the handle. So you wouldn't typically do that, but you could. Another option you can do is to make your own. And making your own push stick is very simple. This was simply cut right here in the corner at a 90-degree angle on my table saw, and then I just took a jigsaw to cut the corner of it out. I cut a handle on it that sticks just above my hand and a little bit of a curve. And now when I push something through the table saw, my hand is well away from that blade and I can push it and guide it like this. The nice part is it puts lots of down pressure here, and it's got this heel on the back side to keep this piece pushing forward, which is really, really important. That's what we want. So this is just another great idea you can do, and you can make this. I made this one out of MDF. You can make it out of plywood. You can make it out of so many other types of materials. Okay. Now, going back to the table saw a little bit, there is one device in particular that we always want to try to ensure that we always have on our table saws, and that is this little piece here. Okay, this is referred to on a table saw, and every single table saw brand has them. This is called a riving knife. Now, what the riving knife does, if this is my saw blade, this riving knife is going to sit along the back side of the saw blade on your table saw, so on the output side of the blade. The reason this is important is because in the event that, let's say, we don't have this riving knife, and I do see this quite often when I'm on a lot of construction sites, but if we don't have the riving knife in place, what can actually happen as we push a piece of wood through? Let's say we have an issue with our fence over here. Maybe it's not square and it's actually angled in towards the blade on the back side. If that happens, your piece that you're pushing through can go through like this and actually bind and catch the backside of the blade. And if it does that, because the blade is always going to be spinning towards you like this, it can actually take this piece and throw it up in the air at you. Okay, that's what the kickback is. What this does, so long as the riving knife is the same thickness of the blade, which is very, very important, this riving knife prevents that piece of wood from being able to pinch on the back side of the blade, because in order to do that, it would have to push past the riving knife. And as you can see, the throat plate of the riving knife is fairly big, so all of this material is secured in a bracket inside your table saw. Okay, now my blade, my saw blade that I have right here, and most standard blades are about 1/8 of an inch thick. This riving knife is designed for a blade that is 1/8 of an inch thick. However, you can buy thin kerf blades. When you buy a thin kerf blade, the thin kerf blades, and the kerf is simply the thickness of the cut. All right, when you buy a thin kerf blade, it's about 1/16 of an inch, and with a riving knife that's 1/8 of an inch thick, you will not be able to use the riving knife, because the riving knife will be thicker than the actual blade width itself, which is going to cause binding issues as you're pushing something through the table saw. So before you decide to take your table saw and switch it to a thin kerf blade, you need to have a look at your riving knife. If it's a 1/8 thick riving knife, then you need to get a 1/16 of an inch riving knife, or something that's going to match the thickness of that blade. All right. All table saws come with guards over top of the blades. I realize that a good majority of people take those blades off, and sometimes that is okay. Sometimes it is necessary for doing things such as dado cuts, where we've got a dado stack of blades that might be cutting a channel into a piece of wood. Where we have to take that blade guard off, we have to use additional caution to make sure our hands stay away from the blade, because the guard is designed to keep our hands safe. So that's where devices like this become even more important. Now, I've got one of these here, but I would suggest having 2 of these, all right, or two push sticks, or one of these, or something like that to help with pushing that piece through. Okay, so that's one of the most important things that you have to remember on a table saw, is we need to make sure that we have this riving knife in place, or it's going to pinch, bind, throw it back at us, and that is not a good thing. Now, when it comes to blades, the one thing you may notice here is, so I've got a blade. This is a used blade. I've had it just freshly sharpened. I haven't used it since it was sharpened, but one of the things I do with all of my blades when I store them, because when it's sharpened, that carbide on the teeth is very, very sharp. And this is an industrial blade. The carbide is very thick, very strong. So I go to my local hardware store and I will buy some just basic clear brake tubing or whatever it is. I slice this right down the middle, and then I just simply push it right over top of the actual teeth itself. So it helps preserve the teeth, but it also stops you from cutting your hand on the teeth when you go to pick up the blade, because these blades are sharp. So that's a little something that I do in order to not only protect my blade, but also protect my hand. The only thing with that is when you hang these up, or if you hang your blades up, okay, you'll have to make sure that your dowel or whatever might be going through the center arbor is going to be a little bit longer, because it has to take into account the thickness of the rubber tubing. All right, that's some of the basic safety personal protective equipment that you need to worry about in the shop, and some of the basics when it comes to actually working safely with some of those tools. Okay, remember that safety glasses, you should have these on for almost everything that you're doing. Remember to wear these when the noise is too loud. When it comes to the table saw, if you don't have the riving knife in the table saw, it is not a good idea. If you're doing dado cuts on a table saw, you'll likely have to remove the riving knife. But what that means is your blade shouldn't be cutting right through your material. So use your push sticks and keep your hands away from that blade. If you're just using your table saw for rip cuts, make sure this is in place. That is incredibly important. All right? Thanks very much for listening today. If you could, go ahead and hit that like button on the video and subscribe to this channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification icon, so that way you can get notified when new videos are posted on the channel. Now, if you're interested in seeing the projects that I've been working on, you can visit my channel. That's going to be linked down in the description as well. It is Weekend Woodworking 925. So please feel free to watch my videos as well, and continue watching this channel. And there's lots of valuable content on here. All right? We'll see you next time.